It seems to me some themes came out. One, you want transparency. One, you want to be at the table. And one, you want it sooner rather than later, and especially in terms of the guidance, so at least you know what to prepare for. So with those things in mind, I'd like to ask you, because you've all been involved in this from your different perspectives for a long time, if you could share your experiences in your particular organization under previous legislation, like the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act or the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act, and now DRRA. What have we learned from those that we can now do better? What's working better now already? Could you just kind of compare your experiences and let that kind of inform our decision-making as we try to implement DRRA in the near future? And we'll go back and start at this end and maybe just move down or jump in, whatever. Ms. Merrick?
Thank you very much. You know, our experience is DRRA versus SRIA. I think that SRIA, overall, the implementation of SRIA appeared to be more agency-wide focus. The DRRA implementation currently seems fragmented throughout the agency. That being said, some of the DRRA provisions are much larger in scale and scope than those of SRIA, so some differences are to be expected. I think the mitigation is the piece that, the mitigation program and the piece of that has to have top priority. And we have to take a look at that, and we have to do it through interagency. And that's the difference for us on this one versus SRIA.
Okay, thank you.
I would agree with Director Merrick. So we're both from Ohio. So I've been there about 4 years now, and I would say that the post-Katrina addressed a lot of the perceived failings in both local and FEMA, and then the post-Sandy Act was about process internal, and then with DRRA, I think the criticality of it, one, is the just massive focus on mitigation funding. I mean, that's just key. Resilient infrastructure, enhancing building codes, just making us and sort of pushing it down and encouraging us and enabling us to say, this provides the benefit to being more resilient. And I think that one of the keys is going to be also from a FEMA perspective is engaging representatives of the various interested parties, or the impacted parties, let's just call it impacted, because at the local level, the state is normally the grantee and we are the sub-grantee. The state has X amount of flexibility, and we really need similar flexibility at the local level to look at our programs, look at how we're structured, and use the funds that can really drive resiliency in our community. So I think you have a real opportunity here, as I stated, to continue your oversight of FEMA, but also to encourage them to say, we need you to reach out to the stakeholders and make sure that as you develop these timelines, as you develop the guidance, that at a minimum you consider their viewpoint. At a maximum, you really start taking it to heart and putting it in the guidance that you, and considering the impact, especially being from a county, but the county rolls down to the other communities within that county.
Thank you. Mr. Gore?
It's interesting because I look at this from a couple different aspects. One is, what have we gone through, and then what's our hope for DRRA, right? What's our real hope? Because it hasn't been implemented yet. And so, you know, what we've encountered is extreme professionalism and great work with FEMA on the ground. We have not had problems with our field offices, with them being as clear as possible as what they could foresee what would happen at headquarters, right? You need to send this in, we're going to work with you on the ground, we're going to make sure there's not clawback on the back end, we're going to verify all your costs, we're going to put the people on the ground to do this. So the biggest thing for us with Sonoma is that once it goes to headquarters right now, understanding that they're overloaded and we want to work with them to do it, unfortunately, it can become a black hole. Just like the question for you with guidelines, and you all when you're talking about, oh, are you going to come out with guidelines a year from now or a year and a half from now? So the hope is definitely that the pre-disaster mitigation funds, the enhanced area, becomes a new paradigm. And even if that's up to $200 to $300 million a year, that's not a substantial investment compared to you all appropriating an additional 100 to 150 billion a year. So you can see where you have to do, and agencies like the Forest Service, when I worked at the U.S. Department of Ag, have the same issue. So it's more about what we want to achieve out of it, and I just continue to say that how do we be a part of that? Because right now, just like you asking, it seems like FEMA's saying, well, we're going to come out and do a report. Well, what about all this? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir?
Yes, ma'am. My perspective, Madam Chairwoman, is from basically someone who went through Katrina and recovering Katrina. Then I was on several forums after Sandy, and then now we deal with this. And as the chairman of the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium, what we've observed, especially after Harvey, is that training needs to be a component of it, the awareness part, because at the end of the day, it's the local level, it's the elected officials, the appointed officials, understanding all these things, timelines, the mechanics of what forms and other type of things. So I would say well, I shouldn't use the word mandate, guidance on that training and education and awareness on whatever act needs to be a part of it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Williams. Briefly.
So one of the most important things that we saw during the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act was a phased implementation through a lot of pilots, field testing, and there are absolutely the opportunities to do that in DRRA. I know the state emergency managers, Build Strong Coalition, have communicated a lot of our driving principles and things that FEMA should be looking at and considering this, but they shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And there are many, many opportunities to start phasing this in and start making the meaningful changes right now.
Thank you. Mr. Noel?
Thank you. Having lived through Katrina with my friend and adopting the building code and watching the interaction between the legislators that had to adopt that building code between the place where the disaster was and the rest of the state where it was not, they have to have some flexibility in adopting that code. If you try to mandate the latest published code and you have no changes and no amendments on it, you're not going to get them adopted. That's the problem with that. Further, we had to stand up code officers. We needed money to stand up those code officers. We're blessed. We got $11 million out of Governor Blanco. We got about $12 million out of FEMA, and I got another $10 million out of HUD. It took $34 million to stand up those code officers. They're going to need money to stand those code officers because they've got to train inspectors. They've got to find those inspectors. They've got to pay those inspectors to make this thing work. But it does work. The legislator that voted against adoption of the building codes went after Rita, Gustav, and Ike, and saw the houses that were built to the building codes and saw how much less damage was there versus Katrina. They were believers after that happened. So I'm a 100% believer in that, but you do need to have some flexibility when you're adopting codes.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Now, Mr. Palmer?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On that theme,